Dawn breaks quietly. A pale light slips through the curtains, tracing the edges of a room that feels both lived in and lifeless. A man sits on the floor, cross-legged, surrounded by books that promised peace, meditation guides, spiritual quotes, ancient wisdom written in clean modern fonts. He's been chasing awakening for months now. Waking at 5 a.m., journaling, fasting, disconnecting, breathing. And yet, somehow, he feels further from himself than ever before. His thoughts are quieter, but his soul is restless. The silence he sought now feels like suffocation. He can't explain it, but deep down he wonders, am I truly awakening, or am I just escaping? This is the paradox of the modern seeker. We live in a world obsessed with escaping itself, turning every experience into something to rise above, every pain into something to heal away. We want to be spiritual, but without being human. We crave peace, but fear the chaos that creates it. We want light, without ever facing the darkness that defines its shape. And so, we sit cross-legged, repeating mantras about detachment, trying to silence what makes us alive. But what if the real awakening isn't about transcending the human experience, but descending fully into it? What if it's not about detaching from the noise, but learning to listen more deeply to it, to the pulse of anxiety, the ache of longing, the quiet grief that lives beneath the surface of every calm face? You see, somewhere along the way, awakening became a product, a feeling to chase, a version of yourself to become. The idea that one day, if you meditate long enough, heal deep enough, think clearly enough, you'll reach some serene plateau where nothing can disturb you. But that's not awakening. That's anesthesia. It's the fantasy of control dressed as enlightenment. It's a way to avoid the raw pulse of existence by numbing it with spiritual words. We scroll through videos about letting go, about vibrating higher, about escaping the ego. We repeat these phrases like spells, hoping they'll carry us away from the unbearable weight of simply being alive. But what we don't realize is that this pursuit often becomes another mask, a softer, quieter kind of avoidance. Because the truth is, you don't awaken by running from the human experience. You awaken by remembering that the human experience is the path. Think about it. Every great mystic, every awakened thinker, Jung, Frankl, Watts, Rumi, they didn't rise above their suffering. They descended into it. They faced the absurdity, the fear, the hunger, and the love that define what it means to be human. They didn't preach detachment from pain, they found truth through it. Jung spoke of integrating the shadow. Frankl found meaning inside the concentration camps. Watts laughed at the cosmic joke that everything you run from is still you. None of them escaped humanity. They embraced it. But today, we confuse awakening with control. We think peace means nothing can touch us. We think wisdom means feeling less. We confuse calmness with numbness, and stillness with suppression. We've forgotten that aliveness isn't always comfortable, that to truly feel the miracle of existence is to also open yourself to the ache of it. The same heart that feels joy must also feel grief. The same consciousness that witnesses beauty must also face despair. You can't selectively awaken. Either you awaken to all of it, or none of it. And maybe that's why so many of us feel lost in our search for meaning. Because we've mistaken light for absence of darkness. We've mistaken awakening for escape. But you can't awaken from the dream by denying the dream. You awaken within it, by seeing it clearly, by embracing its contradictions, by holding both pain and peace in the same breath. So, when people say, rise above your emotions, what they often mean is, don't feel too much. But awakening isn't about rising above, it's about falling into the heart, into the breath, into the raw texture of the present moment. The trembling of fear, the weight of grief, the warmth of love. That's where you meet life. That's where you meet yourself. That's where awakening happens. Because the truth is, you can't meditate your way out of being human. You can't heal your way out of heartbreak. You can't journal your way out of loneliness. You can only enter them, walk through them, feel them fully until they transform, not into something lighter, but into something real, something whole. And maybe that's the message we've all been avoiding. That awakening is not a sky you reach, It's a ground you touch. It's the courage to let the waves crash over you without needing to stop them. It's realizing that peace doesn't come when life stops hurting, but when you stop running from what hurts. So perhaps the man sitting on that floor was never doing it wrong. Perhaps the silence wasn't the problem. Perhaps he was just listening for the wrong thing. He thought awakening would feel like floating above himself, but maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's sinking back into the heart that breaks, into the lungs that shake, into the body that aches with memory and hope. Maybe that's what it means to truly wake up. You don't awaken by leaving the storm. You awaken when you realize you are the storm. We all believe that awakening is a kind of clean break, a quiet departure from confusion, pain, and fear. But beneath that belief lies a subtle psychological trap, the desire to escape the messiness of being human, disguised as the search for enlightenment. The more we chase perfection, the more we divide ourselves into what we think is spiritual and what we believe must be destroyed. The truth is, this division doesn't awaken you. It fragments you. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Yet we've been taught to do the opposite, to chase the light while disowning the dark. We polish the parts of ourselves we want the world to see, the calm, the kind, the wise. But beneath the surface, the repressed emotions, anger, jealousy, fear, grief, still live, breathing in the corners of the psyche. We label them low vibration, and in doing so, we exile half of who we are. This is the first great illusion of awakening, that to be spiritual means to be untouchable by shadow. But the shadow does not disappear when ignored. It waits. It gathers power in silence. It shows up as spiritual arrogance, when we secretly feel superior for being above others. It appears as forced positivity, the constant need to vibrate higher, while our suppressed sadness festers underneath. It emerges as burnout, numbness, or the quiet feeling that no amount of self-work ever seems enough. Because how can you find wholeness while denying half of your existence? The human mind loves control. Even in spirituality, we turn awareness into another project, another system to manage the uncontrollable. We meditate to fix ourselves. We practice presence to avoid discomfort. We chant about letting go, while gripping tightly to the image of being someone who's let go. But this is not freedom, it's spiritual perfectionism. It's the ego wearing a robe. It whispers, if you can just think purely enough, feel deeply enough, you'll finally be beyond it all. But the real awakening comes when you see that there is no beyond it all. There is only this trembling, temporary, beautiful chaos of being alive. Nietzsche called it amor fati, the love of one's fate. He didn't mean romanticizing pain, but learning to embrace existence as it is, not as we wish it to be. To love even the parts of life that frighten or break us. He wrote that to live fully is to say yes to life, even in its strangest and most painful episodes. But how many of us actually live that way? We love the sunrise but not the storm. We crave clarity but not confusion. We want meaning without despair, growth without discomfort, peace without surrender. We want heaven without the cross. And yet, every thinker who has glimpsed truth, Jung, Nietzsche, Watts, Frankl, points to the same paradox. You cannot awaken by escaping your humanity. You awaken through it. Jung found wholeness through integration of the shadow. Nietzsche found strength in embracing suffering as the birthplace of meaning. Viktor Frankl discovered freedom in the space between pain and response, even in the most unimaginable suffering. And Alan Watts reminded us that the moment you try to control life, you miss it entirely. You become the wave trying to rise without the ocean beneath it. The mind fears surrender because it confuses surrender with defeat. But real surrender is not passive. It's the act of removing the armor, of no longer resisting what is. Most people spend their lives fighting reality, thinking that control equals safety. But the deeper truth is that control is an illusion. The more tightly you grip, the more life slips through your fingers. You don't fall apart because you feel deeply. You fall apart because you resist feeling deeply. To awaken, then, is not to float above emotion, but to stop fighting it. When anger arises, you breathe it. When fear visits, you sit with it. When grief knocks, you open the door. In this radical acceptance, something shifts, not the world, but your relationship with it. You stop labeling experiences as spiritual or unspiritual, sacred or mundane, good or bad. Everything becomes part of the same sacred current. And yet, this is where most seekers hesitate. Because real awakening feels like dying. The death of identity. The death of the image of the awakened one. The death of control. It feels like falling into yourself with no guarantee that you'll ever come back the same. The ego calls this chaos. The soul calls it rebirth. But remember, the chaos is not the enemy. It is the crucible. The place where your false walls dissolve, and you finally meet what's real. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole by embracing every part of yourself, light and dark, sacred and flawed. To awaken is to realize that you are not meant to transcend the human condition, you are meant to live it consciously. To feel everything fully, but not be consumed by it. To witness yourself falling apart, and still trust that what breaks also builds. In this way, awakening stops being an escape and becomes an embodiment. You no longer chase stillness, you find it even in motion. You no longer seek silence, you hear it beneath the noise. You no longer try to be spiritual, you simply are, because you no longer deny any part of your being. Alan Watts once said, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." The self that seeks awakening can never reach it, because it's built on the idea that you are not already awake. The moment you stop chasing the idea of enlightenment, you discover that awareness has been here all along. In the breath, in the pain, in the laughter, in the ordinariness you tried so hard to transcend. This is the psychological trap of awakening, mistaking the path for the destination, mistaking awareness for avoidance, mistaking light for denial. But when you see through it, you begin to understand something profound. There is no separate, higher self waiting somewhere above the clouds. There is only you, the full, imperfect, contradictory miracle of existence, learning to remember itself. You awaken not by becoming perfect, but by becoming whole. Not by running from the shadow, but by learning to hold it with love. Not by escaping the human experience, but by realizing that it was never something to escape from. And in that realization, something in you relaxes. The mind stops striving. The heart softens. You stop needing to be spiritual and begin to be honest. And in that honesty, raw, trembling, unfiltered, you finally touch the quiet pulse of something real. Something ancient. Something awake. There comes a moment in every seeker's journey when the old ways of reaching upward begin to crumble. The affirmations no longer soothe. The meditations feel hollow. The constant pursuit of becoming better feels like running in circles. You've spent so long trying to ascend, to rise above the chaos, that you begin to forget what ground even feels like. Then one day, something breaks, softly, almost mercifully, and you realize the climb is over. What you were looking for in the clouds has been quietly waiting for you in the dirt. This is where true awakening begins, not as an ascent, but as a descent, into being, into body, into the rawness of life itself. At first, it feels like falling, like losing everything that once defined you. The identity of the healer, the seeker, the calm one, the spiritual one, all the masks start to slip. You start to see that your desire for enlightenment was just another attempt to control life. Another way to keep yourself safe from the unknown. The mind panics because it cannot comprehend awakening without progress. But the soul knows. Awakening was never about climbing out of the storm. It's about realizing you are the storm and learning to dance within it. This descent is not dramatic or grand. It's intimate. It begins in quiet, uncomfortable moments, when you stop trying to fix a feeling and simply feel it. When you stop forcing gratitude and allow yourself to say, "I am angry." When you stop pretending you've healed and admit, "I'm still hurting." In that honesty, the illusion begins to dissolve. The heart cracks open. The silence that once felt empty begins to feel sacred. You realize that the pain you've been trying to avoid isn't blocking your awakening, it is the doorway to it. Viktor Frankl once said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." He wasn't speaking about submission, but transformation. There's a point where suffering becomes unavoidable, loss, heartbreak, uncertainty, the failure of ideals, and in that place, you face a choice: resist or surrender. Resistance builds walls. Surrender opens windows. And through those windows, light enters, not the blinding light of denial, but the soft light of truth. You begin to see meaning not as something found in perfection, but something born in the cracks of your humanity. The descent into being asks you to stop performing spirituality and start embodying it. It's no longer about how peaceful you appear, but how deeply you can love while the storm rages. How honest you can be when everything feels uncertain. How alive you can remain when life refuses to fit your plans. Awakening stops being a concept and becomes an intimacy, with pain, with beauty, with impermanence. You start to see that joy isn't the absence of sorrow, it's the space that holds both. There is a strange kind of grace in allowing yourself to break. The walls that once made you feel safe were also keeping you small. When they collapse, you stand exposed, trembling, uncertain, real. For the first time, you're not performing your life. You're living it. The air feels colder, but cleaner. The silence feels heavy, but honest. Every emotion that once felt like an enemy begins to show its face as a teacher. Fear becomes a call for courage. Sadness becomes proof of love. Anger becomes the voice of boundaries you never honored. The descent reveals that everything you once rejected was simply misunderstood. This is where the rhythm of life begins to shift. You stop chasing experiences and begin receiving them. You stop analyzing everything and start feeling it. You begin to see that the universe is not testing you. It's teaching you how to see. Each wave of emotion becomes a lesson in presence. Each disappointment becomes a doorway to compassion. You start noticing small miracles, the way the wind moves through trees, the weight of your breath, the subtle pulse behind your ribs. You start realizing, this is it. This is life. This is awakening. Alan Watts often spoke about the futility of grasping for control, saying, "To have faith is to trust yourself to the water." When you swim, you don't grab hold of the water, because if you do, you will sink and drown. Instead, you relax and float. The descent into being is learning to float in your own experience, to stop gripping, stop fighting, stop running. It's not weakness. It's the highest form of intelligence. Because only when you stop resisting the water do you realize you are the water, flowing, changing, alive. The process is humbling. Sometimes you'll cry without knowing why. Sometimes you'll feel nothing at all. Sometimes you'll sense an immense peace, followed by doubt that you'll ever feel it again. And that's okay. Because awakening isn't linear. It's cyclical, like breathing. Expansion, contraction, expansion again. The descent teaches you to trust this rhythm. To stop demanding permanence from a universe built on change. And in this surrender, something beautiful happens. The seeker disappears. The struggle softens. You no longer feel the need to become anything, because you see that being itself is enough. The light you were chasing reveals itself not as something distant, but as something quietly pulsing behind your eyes. The divine was never separate. It was hidden beneath your resistance, waiting for you to come home. There's a moment, quiet, still, almost imperceptible, when you realize that you no longer need the world to make sense. You no longer need to escape your emotions. You no longer crave the illusion of perfection. You sit in the same silence that once frightened you, and instead of emptiness, you feel presence. Instead of loneliness, you feel connection. Instead of chaos, you feel rhythm. This is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning of real life. When you stop chasing light, you begin to see that even the darkness glows. The pain you carried becomes soft illumination. The uncertainty that once haunted you becomes freedom. You start to live not as someone trying to reach awakening, but as someone already awake. Someone who can see the sacred in every ordinary moment, the infinite in every breath. To descend into being is to let the divine find you where you are. To stand barefoot in the rain and whisper, "I am here. I am alive." It's to realize that wholeness was never something to reach, it was something to remember. Every drop of rain, every ache of longing, every breath of surrender, all of it was guiding you home. And as the rain falls, washing the dust from your skin, you understand. You were never meant to rise above life. You were meant to fall completely into it, until nothing remains between you and the truth that was always here. Until you look at the storm and see yourself, and whisper, through tears and quiet wonder, I never needed to escape. I only needed to wake up. Morning spills gently across the same room that once felt heavy with searching. The books, the walls, the silence, everything looks the same, yet nothing feels the same. Life hasn't changed, but you have. The noise that once overwhelmed you now hums like background music. The stillness that once scared you now feels alive. You realize that awakening was never about escaping the world, but learning how to see it differently, without distortion, without resistance. Living awake isn't a state of constant peace. It's not eternal calm or endless positivity. It's presence, raw, grounded, sometimes uncomfortable. It's the ability to meet life as it is, not as you wish it to be. You still feel anger, sadness, and fear, but they no longer define you. You hold them gently, knowing they're part of the same current that carries joy and wonder. Awakening doesn't make you untouchable. It makes you open. You begin to see beauty in the mundane. The sound of traffic, the rhythm of footsteps, the softness of evening light, everything becomes part of the same sacred hum. You no longer separate the spiritual from the ordinary because you finally see they've always been one. Doing the dishes becomes meditation. Sitting in silence becomes prayer. Every breath, every glance, every heartbeat becomes an act of participation in something infinite. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Living awake is just that, becoming honest. No masks, no spiritual performances, no trying to be high vibration. It's saying yes to your humanness, the messy, brilliant, tender truth of it. You laugh more easily, cry without shame, and forgive yourself for being unfinished. Of course, you still forget. You still fall back into distraction and overthinking. But now, you don't condemn yourself for it. You understand that forgetting is part of remembering. That awakening isn't a destination, it's a rhythm. Expansion, contraction, silence, noise. You move with life instead of fighting against it. You begin to notice how presence changes everything. When you truly listen, even silence feels alive. When you speak with awareness, words heal instead of wound. When you walk without rushing, time seems to slow down. You realize that peace isn't found by controlling life but by allowing it. Awareness turns even suffering into something sacred, not because it disappears, but because you meet it without fear. In this awareness, life weaves itself into wholeness. You stop dividing experiences into good and bad. You stop chasing meaning and start living it. Love becomes less about possession and more about participation. Happiness stops being a goal and becomes a quiet consequence of alignment. You stop needing to escape moments, because every moment, no matter how fragile, holds truth. And so you live, not perfectly but presently. You wake up, you fail, you try again. You make mistakes, you feel deeply, you laugh, you break, you heal. Through it all, something steady remains, a quiet knowing beneath the movement. A realization that nothing needs to be transcended to be beautiful. One evening, as the light fades, you find yourself in silence again, the same silence that once frightened you. But now it feels like home. You listen to the hum of the city, the whisper of your own breath, the pulse of existence moving through you. You smile not because life is flawless, but because it's real, alive, imperfect, and whole. You were never meant to ascend away from life. You were meant to awaken within it, to find divinity in imperfection, to love without needing to possess, to feel without needing to fix, to exist without needing to escape. And when the next storm arrives, as it always will, you won't run or hide. You'll stand in the rain, eyes open, heart steady, whispering the truth you finally understand. I am not here to escape the human experience. I am here to live it, fully, tenderly, awake.